March 20th, 2024. In the early morning hours while sleeping, Brian Malinowski and his wife are awakened by the crashing sound of their front door being forced open. Panicked and scared, Brian grabs his firearm and peers down the dark hallway. He sees a large figure headed towards him and fires. Brian misses, but sees the bullet ricochet strike the assailant, just as the assailant returns fire, striking Brian Malinowski in the head and killing him. Brian's wife, frozen in fear, is snatched from the bedroom and dragged outside for 4 hours as her husband laid dying. When the smoke cleared, it was discovered that this operation was courtesy of the ATF, and the ensuing investigation into this incident is shocking. Welcome to Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite, The Search Warrant, the ATF, and Brian Malinowski. Hey everyone, welcome back. First, I want to say I appreciate everyone following us, liking us, sharing us. It's why we have the success that we have so early on, and we couldn't do it without you, so please continue to do that. And as always, I like to get right into our exposed file for today. So stay tuned after this episode for some announcements upcoming. And y'all, this story that I'm about to tell you, you are not going to believe this happened. I'm going to start off giving you a little history of what the ATF does. And the ATF is the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms division of the government. And just as you would think, firearms are a big part of what they do, especially as it comes to licensing. If you're a pawn shop or if you are a gun dealer of some sort, they're the people that are going to make sure that you're following all the rules, whether it's background checks along with other rules. And we'll get into some of those. So March 21st, 2024, and I'm sourcing the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and the headline says, Little Rock Airport Director Brian Malinowski is dead after ATF shootout, commissioner confirms. So I'm going to read you a quick article that's going to put this into context, and this was on March 20th of 2024. This was from NBC's website. Guy by the name of Patrick Smith. And it says the executive director of the Bill and Hillary Clinton National Airport in Little Rock, Arkansas, was shot Tuesday as federal officials arrived at his home to serve a search warrant. Brian Malinowski, 53, the airport's executive director, was injured during a firefight after 6 a.m. as the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and explosive agents arrived. He was injured with gunshot wounds and treated on the scene by paramedics before being transported to a local hospital, that from the Arkansas State Police. One ATF agent received what police called a non-life-threatening gunshot wound and was also taken to the hospital. Malinowski's older brother, Matthew, 55 of Pennsylvania, was at his bedside Wednesday and said he didn't know whether his brother would survive. The article goes on to say some other things, but the pertinent stuff I just gave you. All right, so how does this happen? How does an airport executive, as a matter of fact, the highest paid official in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas, end up not only getting shot in a raid, but being the target of the ATF? And the interesting thing about this case, and let me give you a little history on this. I was unaware of this and was doing research for some other cases that I'm working on. came across the congressional hearings that are actually occurring right now with the director of the ATF. Saw a particular clip that kind of caught my eye, watched the clip, and then ended up watching a 3-hour congressional hearing on this case. And I couldn't believe what I heard, and I couldn't believe that I hadn't heard about this previously. So as I did my research, and I guess as luck would have it, the search warrant that was originally sealed on this case had been unsealed by a judge. So I was able to get my hands on those search warrants. And let me explain to you how search warrants work. In order to get a search warrant, you have to have permission from a judge. They have to sign off on that search warrant. In order to get them to sign off on it, you have to turn in what's known as an affidavit for probable cause. And that affidavit is basically a letter detailing all your evidence that you have that makes you think it is necessary to search someone's house or search someone's car, things of that nature. In this case, a search warrant was signed for Brian Malinowski's house and Brian Malinowski's vehicle. Now, it's important to note, and you want to keep this in mind, it was a search warrant, not an arrest warrant. They're very different. And the way that you go about serving those should be very different. So I've went through the affidavit of probable cause and the search warrants so that you don't have to. And I'm going to cover to you exactly what happened to put Brian Malinowski on the ATF's radar. And I'm also going to cover with you some obvious things that they did that I feel were wrong. And before I get into any of that, let me say something. 99.9% of the ATF are great people. They're doing great things. There's good and bad in every profession, as we know. But after reviewing this case, I'll give you this little hint about what I personally think about it. There was a big time failure of leadership here, and it led to someone's death. As I told you, there was a warrant to search and seize the home and vehicle of Brian Malinowski. And I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler alert, I guess, on this. He was shot and killed during the execution of this warrant. And this warrant was based on him being what's known as an unlawful seller of guns. Okay, so a gun dealer without a license. Think of it that way. When you are a gun dealer, you have to have a license, and the difference there between someone that's licensed and someone that's not is someone that's licensed has to perform a background check. If you go to a pawn shop, you buy a gun, they're going to run a background check on you to make sure you're not Osama bin Laden or somebody, right? If you go to a gun show, you don't have to have a background check ran on you, because those are considered, in a lot of cases, hobbyists. And I'm not going to get into the legalities one way or the other necessarily, but just to let you know the difference between those two situations. So at some point in time, prior to this search warrant, as you may be aware, there was a situation where Brian Malinowski got on the ATF's radar. So let's talk first about how he ended up on their radar. It appears that there was a confidential informant in Canada that took pictures of these firearms, and we really don't know a whole lot about that. We just know somehow he came in contact with some firearms. He took pictures of them. He sent those to the Canadian police. The Canadian police then ran the serial numbers. They could see the serial numbers in some of these pictures, ran the serial numbers, and some of them came up with Brian Malinowski's name. So they traced those serial numbers. So the ATF gets this information and they're like, who's this Brian Malinowski guy? And of course, they start kind of digging into who he is. And as they start looking into him, and this is what they'll do, the first thing they'll do is they'll see how many firearms you have bought over time, right? So in this case, they looked at a 3-year period, and they saw that Brian Malinowski had bought 150 guns in that 3-year period. That's a lot of guns. It's not illegal. You can buy as many guns as you want. There's nothing illegal about that, but you're going to raise some eyebrows at the ATF if you do that, because it is a lot of guns. And what they're doing at this point is they're trying to build probable cause. They're basically trying to say it's more probable that he is a gun dealer than not. Basically engaging in the business of selling firearms without a federal firearms license. People do this. It occurs. They may be trying to avoid the paperwork aspect of it because you have to run those background checks when you're a licensed firearms dealer. They may be trying to avoid the fees. There's fees to maintain that license. So it may be totally innocent why they're doing it. And I say innocent in the respect that they may be not necessarily trying to have bad intentions and sell, firearms to a country that's not friendly to the United States, something like that. They're just selling them at gun shows or whatever, but it's a problem. I mean, you don't want guns ending up in the hands of a bunch of felons if you can avoid it, right? So that's their suspicion. They're trying to build probable cause on that, and the radar goes up because of the amount of firearms he's purchased. Then it gets more interesting. They start looking at what type of firearms he was purchasing. And a lot of these, 25 models of the same Glock. Okay, so a Glock 42, a person that's not dealing in firearms for a living, right? They're not going to buy 25 Glock 42s. It's just not going to happen. This guy had at least multiples, so 3 or more of the same brand and type of gun purchased over and over again out of those 150 guns. So he was buying identical brands, manufacturers of guns, and that raises flags. Then they find a firearm, and the way they found that firearm, and this firearm was licensed also to Brian Malinowski, the way they found it, they pulled a guy over. And the police go up to it's a traffic infraction. He was speeding. Police go up to the vehicle. They smell marijuana. They search the vehicle and they find a firearm registered to Brian Malinowski, or that was the original purchaser of that gun. Well, this happens 3 times within short order with 3 different people. So now he's really on the radar. So at this point, they start going back to distributors, and they get what's known as 4473s. These are the forms that if you're a gun dealer and you sell a gun to an individual, you have to turn in what's known as a 4473. And that's just paperwork so that a background check, etc., can be ran on that individual. And Brian Malinowski was buying these guns legally from a dealer. Matter of fact, it was a particular website he was going to. And so the paperwork trail was there. And that's how they knew not only how many guns he had bought, but the brands of guns he had bought. They start at that point an undercover operation. And Brian Malinowski was very active in going to gun shows and having booths in gun shows, as a matter of fact. And an undercover agent starts going to these gun shows, and he sees Brian Malinowski there, and he's setting up booths, right? He's got guns laid out on a table. He's talking to people, and he's telling them how much a gun costs. Look, use your common sense on that. He's definitely selling firearms as more of, let's say, a side hustle than a hobby. Okay. And that's not going to be my argument in this situation, because to me, it's apparent he was, technically breaking the law. So they're looking at the totality of these circumstances in order to build this search warrant. They put together a case. They even have a particular ATF agent buy guns from Brian Malinowski at gun shows. You know, they're surveilling him constantly. And he knows none of this is going on. He has no clue about any of this. So they get the warrants signed for both his vehicle and his house. Now, again, these are search warrants. These are not arrest warrants. There is a difference. But why do they want these search warrants? Well, they want to look at his electronics. They want to get a hold of that. They want to look at his cell phone. They want to look for paper records. They want to look for receipts. They want his actual firearm inventory because they don't necessarily have all the proof yet for an arrest, but they're pretty sure the search warrants will lead to that. So that's why they don't have an arrest warrant at the time. A judge is not going to sign one. They don't have enough proof. At least that's the way they felt. So they didn't try to get an arrest warrant. And that tells you something in that too. You want to stay off of the ATF's radar. Don't buy multiples of the same gun. It's legal to do that. You're not doing anything illegal, but unless you have a good reason for doing that, you're probably going to go on that radar. I mean, maybe it's you and your wife and you buy two of the same Glock. You know, you get matching Glocks. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. You can do that. But be aware, you're probably going to go on the ATF radar. I've heard that you should never buy two guns within 5 days of each other for that same reason. It'll kind of raise a flag with the ATF. Personally, hey, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'll buy 20. If they're for my personal use, I'm not going to hesitate to buy as many guns as I feel like I want to buy at that time. If the ATF wants to come talk to me about it, that's fine too. And let me say this, the ATF, probably a lot of those guys are hobbyists too. If you go into a career and you decide to go into the ATF, you probably love firearms. But there's good and bad in every profession. I'm going to tell you what, somebody screwed the fuck up on this one. So they get that search warrant. And on the search warrants, they have a certain day that search warrant has to be served by. These particular search warrants, the date was the date that this whole incident went down, the 20th of March. That was the last day they had. And you can't serve search warrants just any time of day. As a matter of fact, in this particular case, they could not serve that search warrant before 6:00 a.m. Can't show up at 5. You got to show up at 6. And I think the cutoff on that was 10 o'clock at night. So they had that window. Obviously, my opinion, they're going to serve it as early as possible. You have a better chance of catching someone while they're groggy. Their mind is not all about them. It's early in the morning. So they meet at a date, and it was not the 20th. It was the prior week. And they meet at a Walmart, and someone determines, Brian Malinowski is not home. And that's a key part to this case. Listen to what I just said. They had everybody ready to go. They meet at a Walmart parking lot. It's early in the morning. Someone figures out Brian Malinowski is not home. So they call it off. Now, why? Why call it off? The person doesn't have to be there to serve a search warrant. They can be 4 states away. You can break in their house and search whatever you want. You have a warrant to do that. But they didn't. They wanted him there. And you're going to see why as we go on through this podcast. So the search warrant does not get served that day. It gets served on the 20th. And I just read you at the beginning of this podcast a little article that covered the quote unquote shootout, if you will, between Malinowski and the ATF. So I'll pick up there. And as I told you, Brian Malinowski was shot. He was brought to the hospital. And I'm going to read you this. This was March 21st of 2024. This is from the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Little Rock Airport Director Brian Malinowski dead after ATF shootout, commissioner confirms. The executive director of the Bill and Hillary Clinton National Airport was shot in the head by federal officials in a shootout Tuesday morning and has died. With a heavy heart, we announce the passing of our executive director, Brian Malinowski. This from Bill Walker, who was the chair of the Little Rock Airport Commission. Brian was a 16-year employee of the airport. Under his leadership, our airport has experienced significant growth and success, expanding services and offerings to our community and state. And he also offered condolences to Malinowski's family and friends. It goes on to say he opened fire on officers as they attempted to search a search warrant at his home located in West Little Rock. A man that was making $264,000 a year was the head of the Little Rock Airport, the highest paid official working for the city of Little Rock, dead in a shootout. Now, none of that money necessarily matters, but it's important to the story in that this guy was not your typical arms dealer, and the ATF knew it. They're not stupid. They have common sense. And it's my belief this could have been completely avoided. And a man's dead now because of it. So what happened? What happened during that raid? And I want you to put yourself, what really grabbed me during this story is this could have been any of us. And I'm going to tell you why right here. And the New York Times did a great job of really covering what happened. So I'm going to reference that. The loud noises outside their bedroom door woke them before dawn. Brian Malinowski bolted up and looked at his wife. "Stay back," she remembers him saying after he reached into the drawer for his gun and loaded it. He crept into a hallway of their home in Little Rock, Arkansas, and saw figures in the darkness. He started shooting and was met with a return fire. The people shooting back at him were agents of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, executing a search warrant on suspicion that Malinowski had repeatedly sold guns without a license. What made this different from many confrontations was that Mr. Malinowski was a respected official in the community and a director of the Little Rock Airport. Mr. Malinowski shot an agent in the foot. As the agents fired back, a bullet struck Malinowski, 53, in the head, and 2 days later, he died in the hospital. His death has been met by outrage from his family, friends, and gun rights supporters in Arkansas and beyond, who say the raid on March 19th was ill-conceived, unnecessary, and a shocking case of government overreach. Why couldn't this be avoided, his wife said in a recent interview at her home where newly patched bullet holes lined the walls. Republicans in Congress are asking the same question. In a hearing Thursday, the House Judiciary Committee grilled the director, ATF's Stephen Dettelbach, about this case, one of the latest tension points in the country's bitter divide on access to guns. But in a heavily armed nation where illegal gun sales are linked with other violent crimes, some law enforcement experts have defended both the investigation of Mr. Malinowski and the need for serving search warrants early in the morning. Shortly after the raid, the ATF revealed that it had been investigating Mr. Malinowski for months on suspicion he was selling a large number of firearms at gun shows without a license, sometime soon after he bought them. The law at the time was vague, exempting people who occasionally sold guns as a hobby, but not spelling out how many sales was too many. The evidence gathered by the ATF convinced a judge to sign a search warrant, leading the agents to enter the home on a quiet cul-de-sac that morning. And it goes on to discuss, he was a well-respected member of the community, wealthy, lived in a wealthy neighborhood, etc. Some important things to note. Why was he killed? Well, here's what happened when the smoke cleared. The ATF shows up at that same Walmart on the 20th of March, and it is 10 to 12 vehicles, estimated between 40 and 50 agents. And they descend upon Brian Malinowski's house in a quiet little subdivision. They get out of the vehicles, and the Ring camera captures this. They go to the front door. One of the ATF officers has a piece of black tape ready to go, and he sticks it right over the Ring camera. Now, why do you do that? Then they kick open the door. That's right. They had what's known as a no-knock warrant. Now, are there situations where a no-knock warrant is okay? Yes. Yeah. If you've got a serial killer in a house and you're pretty sure of it and you've got an arrest warrant, you're not exactly going to want to knock on the door and say, police, open the door. Likely the assailant would run. But Brian Malinowski was not someone that you would need to have a no-knock warrant to serve a search warrant for. The law says these have to be extremely limited circumstances where you have a no-knock warrant. And there's a reason for that. If you're on the other side of that door, you don't know who's busting in your house. Brian Malinowski and his wife were in bed asleep. The front door bust open. It's still dark outside. They hear this. They wake up. And what's he do? The same thing I would do, the same thing likely everybody listening to this would do. You grab your gun, you load your gun, you look down a hallway, you see figures. Nobody's identified themselves. Nobody's announced themselves. Hey, ATF, put your hands up. How do we know this? Brian Malinowski's wife, because they didn't have body cameras on. Not only did they cover the tape on the door, they didn't have on body cameras, which body cameras are designed to protect both the citizen and the police. Look, let's be honest. Body cameras are on everybody for one reason. You want to avoid a circumstance where it's he said, she said, and a body camera is going to tell the truth. It has audio on it, so you're not only going to hear what occurred, but you're going to see what occurred. It protects both the police and the citizen. None of them had body cameras on. And we're going to get into why they say they didn't have them on and why I think they didn't have them on in just a minute. But they bust in. Brian Malinowski jumps out of the bed. He's protecting his wife. He shoots down that hallway when he sees these figures. He has no, this could be the devil himself coming to kill me. He shoots. A bullet hits something. The ricochet hits the ATF agent's foot. They fire, meaning the ATF, shoot Brian Malinowski in the head. He eventually dies 2 days later in the hospital. They then grab his wife, pull her out of the bed. Now, her husband's just been shot. At this point, maybe they said, we're ATF, come on. I don't know. But they grab her, they pull her out of the house, they put her in a police car for 4 hours. Several times while she's sitting in that police car, she's asking, how's my husband? This lady's probably crying. She's in pieces. How's my husband? They won't even answer her. Major failure here. Whoever led these men to do that needs to be fired immediately. You fucked up. You're a dumb ass. Use some common sense. They've been investigating that guy for months. They knew his movements. They were following him. This guy is not the head of a gang that is dealing arms with the mafia. This guy is the head of the airport in Little Rock. Look, he's doing this probably because he loves guns. It's a side hustle. Did they have a right to get a search warrant? And was that search warrant valid? Absolutely. This guy was definitely selling guns beyond a hobby. If you're buying that many guns and you've got 13 guns laid out at a gun show, you're probably doing it more as a side hustle than a hobby. And he probably should have been registered. So I'm not saying they were in the wrong for the suspicion. And I'm not saying this guy was not dealing guns without a license, because as much as I hate to say it, he probably was. It looks to me like he was. But this was not a guy that if they knocked on the door and said, Mr. Malinowski, it's the ATF. We need you to open up. He's coming to the door. This guy's not running out the back window. He's got a wife and he's got a job where he's making $300,000 a year that he don't want to lose. He probably would have admitted to it. Hey, it's not, he wouldn't have got the death penalty. He'd have gotten some trouble, but he's not going to go shooting at the ATF over this. He would have probably played dumb and just said, I didn't realize I was supposed to have a license. I thought you could sell at a gun show without a license. And he partially would have been correct. I mean, it is very unclear, and we're going to get into that, but now he's dead. So as I read you in that article, and this just occurred last week, hearings with the House Judiciary Committee started, and they had several different people testify. One of them was the ATF director himself, guy by the name of Stephen Dettelbach. Another one was the family attorney for Brian Malinowski, who also, interestingly enough, had a lot of experience. He was a federal prosecutor, so he kind of knows how that side of government works. And I'm going to play you a clip. And this clip is Representative Jim Jordan from Ohio. And it kind of opens the hearings on the ATF planning that raid on Brian Malinowski. And it's pretty hard to beat the way Jim Jordan sums it up here. So I'm going to play that for you. Here's that.
We'll begin the hearing with opening statement. Chair recognizes himself. Government's not supposed to change the rules without a vote of Congress. Executive branch executes the laws. The legislative branch passes the laws. But when you bypass that format, which is exactly what the ATF has done, you get all kinds of bad things. First, it was the pistol brace rule. November 26, 2012, the ATF told the inventor of the pistol brace, quote, he would not be subject to the National Firearms Act. But last year, they changed the rule. After 12 years, changed the rule. The rule, by the way, the pistol brace was put together to help disabled veterans be able to shoot, be able to practice and shoot at the range. Now, with the rule change, if you don't turn it in, get rid of it, you become a felon. Then it was a policy change that the ATF enacted. The ATF now says if a federal firearms licensee makes a mistake on a form, even if it's a clerical mistake, well, that now equals a, quote, willful falsifying of records, and they could lose their license. In fact, 157 FFLs lost their license last year in this gotcha game that the ATF is playing with people who are in the business of selling firearms. And the pressure to deal with what the ATF comes out and finds you made some mistake on a form, many people are just voluntarily giving up their FFL. 24 in 2021, 69 in 2022, 80 people last year gave up their license versus dealing with the hassle from the agency that's supposed to help them comply, not put them out of business. And finally, there's the new definition of who actually needs a federal firearms license. Since 1968, the definition said it had to be your principal livelihood in the business of selling firearms. You needed that. If you were doing that, you needed an FFL. But this past Monday, new definition was put in place. Said if you're earning a profit, ATF can't really define what that means. You sell one gun to your cousin, made $10, made $50 on the sale of a gun, 2 guns to someone, 10 guns. In fact, they couldn't even tell the court how it works, this new definition. When you make up the rules as you go, bad things happen. You lose your livelihood for a clerical error. You become a felon for having a pistol brace they told you was legal for 12 years. And you might even get shot. That's what happened to Brian Malinowski just 2 months ago. We have Brian's widow with us today. She was here with us yesterday. Heard some powerful testimony from U.S. Attorney Bud Cummings, who represents the Malinowski family. In fact, I'm going to read from Mr. Cummings' testimony that he gave in this room yesterday. It's legal to buy, trade, and sell guns without a federal firearms license if you are a collector or hobbyist. But at some point, the ATF decided that Brian Malinowski had crossed a murky line, and he was no longer a hobbyist. Because of that, ATF concluded he was required to purchase a $200 federal firearms license before he sold any more guns. I call it murky because there is no bright line test. It's truly subjective. But one thing seems certain. Brian Malinowski received no warning. His family, his friends, his work colleagues would all guarantee you he loved his career and he would have never knowingly jeopardized it over a weekend hobby. His real job, his main job, the only job, was he ran the Bill and Hillary Clinton Airport in Little Rock, Arkansas, highest paid official in the municipal government, made $260,000 a year. But on March 19th at 6:01 a.m., over 1 hour before sunup, 10 carloads of ATF agents and Little Rock Police Department officers came to the Malinowski home to execute their search warrant. Not an arrest warrant, search warrant. At 6:02:46 a.m., ATF agents in full SWAT gear approached the front door. They had a piece of tape ready to cover the camera lens of the doorbell camera, which they did. Next, Mrs. Malinowski heard only a loud crash as her front door caved in. Her husband, Brian, woke up to the sound of the crash, found a pistol, loaded a magazine, and left the bedroom to investigate. Brian warned his wife to stay behind in the bedroom, but Mayor stubbornly followed him down the hallway. The ATF apparently killed electricity to the home. The front room was usually well lit at night, but Mrs. Malinowski saw only darkness as she peered down towards the front entryway. She could only see shadowy outlines of presumed home invaders standing in her front hallway. That's what Brian saw too. Brian fired a few shots at the intruders' feet to drive them back out of the front door. The ATF shot Brian in the head. His wife was standing inches away from him. A mere 57 seconds. 57 seconds elapsed from the time agents covered the doorbell camera until gunshots erupted and Brian was fatally wounded. 6:02:46 to 6:03:43. Agents immediately dragged Mrs. Malinowski into the front yard. She was barefoot, wearing minimal night clothing, and the temperature was 34 degrees. They locked her in the back seat of a car and detained her there for 4 hours, refusing her many requests to check on her husband she had just seen shot, wouldn't allow her to get close or even use the neighbor's bathroom. Even though policies have been in place at both the ATF and the Little Rock Police Department for the past 3 years, requiring the use of body-worn cameras when executing any search warrant, the Department of Justice tells us that no body cameras were used. If this isn't the weaponization of government, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. Mr. Dettelbach, we're going to have questions about this and a host of other things the ATF has done under your watch.
So that was a pretty good summation of the events of that day. And then Representative Jordan, he had the opportunity to question the ATF Director Stephen Dettelbach directly about that deadly raid on Brian Malinowski. And he wanted to know specifically, what were you trying to hide? Why did you put that tape on the Ring doorbell camera? Why weren't you wearing body cameras that day? So here's that.
Mr. Dettelbach, what were you trying to hide? On the raid on March 19th at Mr. Malinowski's house, disabled the doorbell camera, cut electricity to the house, and you didn't wear body cameras. What were you guys trying to hide?
Mr. Chairman, we're not trying to hide things. In fact,
Sure seems like it.
After
You guys cut electricity to the house? That's a question.
I'm trying to answer. Okay, if there's no question, that's fine. I'm sorry.
No, that is a question. Did you?
After the incident, we, along with the Little Rock Police, called for an independent investigation being done by the Arkansas State Police and the local prosecutor. That's not trying to hide anything.
I asked 3 questions. Why'd you put the tape on the doorbell camera? Why'd you cut the lights? And why didn't you wear the body cams? What are you trying to hide?
And Mr. Chairman, the reason that we called for the investigation is we're not trying to hide anything. The reason I'm not going to talk about what's going on in that investigation is to respect its independence and out of fairness. There's a reason for the Department of Justice policy that's existed for so many decades about not commenting on pending matters. It's not fair to people, and it risks the perception that people are trying to influence
how about this one? Why'd you ignore the rules? Because don't the rules say you should only use a no-knock entrance into a property if it's the only way, if it's the absolute best way to do it? I mean, I can read from Ms. Monaco's directive. Limit the circumstances in which agents may seek to enter a dwelling pursuant to a warrant without complying with the knock and announce rule because of the risk posed to both law enforcement and civilians. So you want to limit this. Why'd you guys do it all in 57 seconds?
Respectfully, with respect to what I said before, is that we are not trying to hide anything. An independent agency is investigating it, and we, pursuant to longstanding policy,
Director,
are not going to comment.
The Department of Justice has already told us you guys weren't wearing cameras. I'm just asking why.
For the cameras, our body-worn camera policy, I can talk about that. I think I can answer the question without talking about this case.
You can talk about some things relative to the investigation, but not others. We want all the answers to what's going on here.
I will tell you, with respect to the body-worn camera policy, the Department of Justice announced that policy when it was announced, as we have communicated to your staff and you. It was announced that it would be phased implementation. ATF is implementing that policy. We've implemented it in just under a third of our field divisions. We have not received 3 separate requests for program funding from Congress to do so, but we are still doing it. I watched a hearing a couple of weeks ago where your fellow chairman...
Did the Little Rock police officers who accompanied you on this raid, did they wear body cams?
Again, not commenting on this specific case, but in general, the Department of Justice written policy allows local law enforcement on these types of operations, short-term operations, to follow their own guidelines and policies, if they wish, in body-worn cameras. And what I wanted to say is...
Their policy was to wear them. They weren't wearing them that day. We want to know why. Did you tell them not to wear them?
Mr. Chairman, again, it is simply unfair at this point while there's a pending investigation.
That's a simple question. We just want to know why they weren't following the rules. Their rules say wear body cameras. Your rules say wear body cameras. You weren't wearing body cameras. I go back to my original question. What were you trying to hide? We saw the video where you walked up and you put the tape on the doorbell. We know there were no lights to the foyer area. We have Mrs. Malinowski here who can testify to that. And we know you weren't wearing body cameras. What were you hiding?
Again, Mr. Chairman, we're not hiding anything. And with respect to the body-worn camera policy, the people there...
Why on the 12th did you not go and search the home? You were all circled up, ready to go, but a week before, on the 12th of March, you don't go, you go on the 19th. Why'd you decide not to go on the 12th?
Mr. Chairman, these operations, and by the way, we do about 11,000 operations each year. They're very dangerous operations. ATF doesn't do anything that is not dangerous. Well, it's not quite true, but many of them are very, very dangerous. And those operations are handled by people with decades of law enforcement experience. They plan them, they look at things.
Director, you got to admit, this is a little unique. You got a citizen, the highest paid official in the municipal government, Little Rock, Arkansas, making $260,000 a year, running the airport, no criminal background history, nothing, and he's dead at a pre-dawn raid when it sure looks like you could have served this search warrant when he wasn't there, but you decided not to. You decided to wait till he was home when you did it on March 19th. And as a result, Mr. Malinowski is no longer with us.
Well, first of all, let me just say this, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, any time that there's a loss of life, that is a profound incident. And of course, on behalf of just myself, ATF, and all law enforcement, we are very sorry when those things happen. Also, an agent was shot that day, and I'm sure you are sorry that occurred also.
Of course, all the more reason to follow the no-knock warrant, not to have a no-knock warrant take place and follow the rules.
Mr. Chairman, as somebody who has worked with law enforcement for decades, there's a great temptation when a horrible incident happens to prejudge. Sometimes people even try to use it to advance agendas. The cops who are in the field and the family
I just want the answers. My time has expired.
It's important to note that there were some police from the city of Little Rock there. Okay, it wasn't just the ATF. And those folks usually have, and I'm 99% sure the city of Little Rock is no different. They have a policy. They have to have their body cameras on. And all of them have body cameras. It's amazing how the ATF with $1 billion budget doesn't, but the city of Little Rock or these smaller cities throughout the country can afford body cameras. We'll get a little bit more into that, but it's important to note that if they weren't wearing them, it was because they were told to take them off. I think an investigation is going to show that. But we'll continue on. And Representative Daryl Issa, who is a Republican from California, he spoke about the ATF's decision to conduct a no-knock raid specifically on Brian Malinowski. And he brought up some interesting points, and here's that.
I recognize myself now. Director, you accused a dead man of a crime of illegally selling in the back seat a weapon. And would I hear that correctly?
Respectfully, what I did was talked about the public search warrant affidavit that was filed
No.
and proved by the judge.
I understand, but you're standing by your search warrant. You're standing by the fact that in the search warrant, you're alleging that he had committed a crime. Is that correct?
Chairman, respectfully, I was making the point that a federal magistrate...
You're not being respectful. Answer the question. The question is, did you allege that he had committed a felony, a crime, in your affidavit?
The judge did find that.
Okay. Well, I'll take that as the judge found it because you alleged it. So you alleged a crime, but you didn't seek to arrest him, did you? Did you have an arrest warrant for Mr. Malinowski?
My understanding...
That's a yes or no, Director.
My understanding is that there was not an arrest warrant. I don't have the full investigative file, but that is my understanding.
You came here, you knew we were going to ask, you saw yesterday, and now you're playing one of the games that the chairman and I didn't like during Fast and Furious. We don't like it now. If you want to be back here again, because you can't seem to know what you should know, what Mrs. Malinowski deserves to know, if some group of 10 carloads of people showed up and kicked in a door in the dark of night and somebody came and shot at them, we wouldn't be talking about somebody getting shot in the toe. We'd be talking exclusively about a planned murder of somebody who may or may not be armed, but who had every right to have weapons in their home, an expectation they had weapons in their home, an expectation that they might use it. All of that, you don't have to be ATF to know. So let's go back on track here again. If you had a belief that he had committed a crime, and if your intent was to arrest him, then that would explain why a week earlier you've called off an already authorized search because you were only going to search for the weapons, you weren't going to search for him. Isn't that correct?
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I am not able and will not. It's not fair to do this during the pendency of a criminal investigation.
No, look, it's always, I'm sorry, but DOJ and you guys, it's always, you can go on forever. Hunter Biden's over. Why didn't you do a no-knock on him at his home with the vice president?
To be clear, this isn't our investigation. We in the Little Rock Police asked an outside investigation be conducted by the Arkansas State Police. It's their investigation. The district attorney is going to review that.
And I hope they appropriately find that in spite of qualified immunity, that you blew it badly enough that, in fact, criminal charges should be considered.
I hope they just find whatever the truth is.
What is the penalty for the crime alleged on the affidavit for selling a weapon not as a licensed dealer? What's the penalty?
Oh, my Lord. Mr. Chairman, I believe it's a 10-year felony, and there are two different crimes. It might be a 5-year and a 10-year felony.
Okay.
I want to get back to you to make sure that there's a series of statutes that run all in a row there. I want to make sure I'm not mixing up the statutes.
5 years or it's 10 years. It's not a death penalty. Is that correct?
There is not a death penalty for that statute, no.
Okay. So Mr. Malinowski was not in any danger of being executed for what he is alleged to have done and no longer can defend himself because he's dead. But he was killed doing what any normal citizen does when people enter their home in the dark of night and they don't know who they are. If you had body cameras, maybe Mrs. Malinowski didn't hear right. Maybe you said police and identified yourself. Maybe he said, I don't care, and maybe he fired the shots. I don't believe that, and I don't think you do either. I believe he had every real belief that he was defending his wife and family. He fired warning shots, a ricochet hit a police officer or an ATF agent, and you killed him. Those are the facts. I have been investigating ATF for many years, and ATF agents have, rightfully so, and with great trepidation, I'm sure, come forth and been our whistleblowers. And we've consistently seen there are two ATFs, the one we need and want and deserve, and the one that plays fast and loose, like 10 cars going in deliberately with a warrant that did not entitle an arrest, when in fact, if you wanted to arrest him, it would have been reasonable to arrest him at work and simultaneously go into his home. If you had done that, he'd be alive today, and we'd be talking about other things, including whether you acted legally. With that, I yield back.
All of this that I'm playing you right now, all of these folks in the Senate are bringing up some really good points. And I thought that Matt Gaetz, a Republican from Florida, really put Stephen Dettelbach in a corner with the utter confusion on how they classify gun sellers versus hobbyists. So here's that exchange between ATF Director Stephen Dettelbach and Representative Matt Gaetz during that House Judiciary Committee meeting.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the ATF has a final rule. I think the comments and the rule itself accumulate to about 466 pages that define who is engaged in the business of firearms dealing. So how many firearms does someone have to sell to be engaged in the business of firearm dealing?
Congressman, as you know, that matter is being litigated in several courts. So sticking to what's already in the public record, the rule itself is 16 pages, skipping lines. And there's about, as you say, over 400 pages of explanation.
Yeah.
And so there are factors that are conduct-based, not numerical-based, but conduct-based. We received many comments. One of the comments that we received was from, I think, Senator Cornyn, who expressed a view that there was no numerical threshold. Others had a different view.
In the House Judiciary Committee, we probably won't look to Senator Cornyn as the oracle of all things gun rights. But, so you're saying there really is no number?
I'm saying that Congress, our job is to implement the statute that Congress writes.
But
Congress
just like for a regular person that one form or another acquires guns, and they're trying to figure out, how many of these guns do I sell before I have to register as a dealer? What you're saying is there is no bright line there.
I'm saying that there's now more information than ever in the form of that rule for specific conduct-based.
I think just for a regular person, more information than ever is probably less helpful than if you sell 3 guns, you're not a dealer, and if you sell 4 guns, then you are a dealer, right? And this rule that you guys have drafted, it's currently enjoined, right? It has no effect?
There are 3 cases that I know of, maybe more going on now. One of the judges has issued equitable relief.
So in Texas, a judge has stopped the implementation of this law for 3 reasons. One is that there's no minimum requirement. And the court has found, this court in Texas, that you aren't just giving effect and life to Congress's statutes. You've in fact exceeded your authority, because Congress would have never allowed some sort of sliding scale where 16 pages of single-spaced whatever determines whether or not you're a firearm dealer, not how many guns you sell. There's a second reason that court in Texas said that this would not have effect, and it's that actual profit is not a requirement of the statute, only the predominant intent for profit. How do you understand that ruling?
Again, that's in litigation. The Department of Justice's positions on each and every one of these matters is public. It is laid out in many, many pages of briefing. And so I would ask people to look at our briefs that we filed in the court, and I would commend your attention
No, but
to them.
if someone's just trying to figure out whether or not they have to get a federal license or be subject to your guys breaking their doors down and potentially killing them, you would think that you'd want that to be easily understandable. And here, even if someone isn't turning a profit, but they might want to turn a profit, they could be subject to this regulation, and the court found that troubling. And then the third reason the court identified is that your rule doesn't just give meaning to Congress's statute, but that, quote, arbitrarily eviscerates the safe harbor provision. So there's a safe harbor provision of this law that says if you're just engaged in the occasional sale or exchange or purchase of a firearm for a personal collection or a hobby, that this regulatory structure wouldn't affect you. But what the court is saying here in blocking your rule is that you have eviscerated the safe harbor that exists for the hobbyist. Do you have a reaction to that ruling?
Again, yes, our position is not that, but it's under litigation. We have filed extensive.
I know, but here we are.
This.
Make your argument. Well, I mean, they're sitting here in court trying to figure out what Congress means. What we're saying is there should definitely be a bright line in terms of guns. You shouldn't have to have this pondering question about profit motive, and you shouldn't eviscerate the safe harbor. That's what we're saying. So what's your argument as to why the safe harbor should be eviscerated?
Our argument is to look to the statute that Congress wrote. The statute that Congress wrote, and I just want to make clear that people understand this. There was an earlier comment about the word livelihood. That's not in the law anymore that Congress wrote. Congress took that out of the law. It doesn't exist anymore. So we start with the statute. That's where things always begin and end.
I know you started with the statute, but what this court is saying is that you have exceeded the statute. You've done it in a way that eviscerates the safe harbor, that blurs the lines, and that creates no discernible way for people to comply with the law. And the reason I think you guys are doing that is you want to make it more difficult for people to engage in the legal, lawful, and constitutionally contemplated manner to transfer firearms, and you're trying to criminalize an entire enterprise. And that's why you see us trying to curtail some of your funding and your authorities. I see my time's expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I mean, I think that sums up the confusion right there, and something needs to be done about that. And another thing that came up during these hearings was discussion on the pistol brace. And just real quick, a pistol brace is a brace that goes up around the elbow. It attaches to the butt of a pistol, and it's designed to make the pistol stable so that you can aim it better. And it also takes some of that recoil away. Now, why was this invented? It was actually invented back in, I think it was 2015, for veterans, injured veterans who like to go and shoot, but they were injured in war and maybe they didn't have use of their arm like they used to, from bullets, maybe hitting nerves, things like that. So this guy invented a pistol brace to help with that. And as of May 31st, if you own this pistol brace, now it's completely legal up until May 31st of 2024. As of May 31st, just prior to this audio dropping, if you own a pistol brace, you're legal. But they just changed it. So now you're a felon if you own a pistol brace and it's connected to your gun. Representative Kelly Armstrong of North Dakota covers this in this next clip. And the reason that I'm referencing it is an example here where the ATF may be overreaching with citizens of the United States. And that's right here.
I yield back. Gentleman from North Dakota is recognized.
We're conflating two issues here. A man is dead and an officer was shot, not because of rank and file law enforcement doing their job, but because somebody made a leadership decision in order to execute a warrant in the most dangerous way possible, given the circumstances of that case. And we could sell 6 a.m. and standard operating procedure. You can do that everywhere else. I've represented 3 officers and officers-involved shootings. I spent 10 years dealing with search warrants. I know the facts of this case. I know where the guy worked. I know that he was surveilled. And I know that they chose to implement a warrant in a way that absolutely maximized the risk of harm, both to the person being served the warrant on and to the officers serving the warrant. But I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to something else quick. Federal gun charges are what we call strict liability crimes, right? If you have a gun and you're a prohibited person, that's the crime. There doesn't need to be intent. There doesn't need to be any of those things, right?
I disagree.
So if you're a felon in possession of a firearm, you can say, I didn't know I was a felon?
No, but there's an intent requirement in Congress's statute. You can read 922G1. It's in the statute, Congressman.
You said earlier that ATF's responsibility is to implement the laws that Congress passes, right?
Correct.
When did the U.S. House pass a rule classifying a pistol brace as a short-barreled rifle?
And that rulemaking is based upon the National
When did Congress
Firearms
pass a law?
1934.
When did Congress pass a law? They didn't.
In 1934, Congress passed the National Firearms Act, which said that short-barreled rifles were unusually dangerous.
I'm not
Congress's
asking
words.
you about I'm not asking you about short-barreled rifles. I know what short-barreled rifles are qualified as in the National Firearms Act. When did Congress pass a law saying pistol braces qualified? When did Congress pass that?
Congress passed they are covered by the National.
When did the Senate pass the law? They didn't. When did the president sign the law? He didn't. The first pistol brace was sold in 2012. A guy walked into a gun store, bought it legally, walked out of the gun store with the pistol brace rifle. No need for $200, no need for a stamp.
So you're saying if there's a new brand of gun that didn't exist in 1968, that the Gun Control Act doesn't apply to it?
I'm saying in 2012, a guy in Dickinson, North Dakota walked into a firearms store and bought a gun legally, correct? With a pistol brace. Didn't need to do a stamp, didn't need to do a $200 registration.
Again, we look at, I think.
No, this is a factual question. The first pistol brace was sold in 2012. Did the person who purchased it need a stamp, and did he need the federal government's permission to buy that gun? 2012, that's not a hard question.
Respectfully, the 2012, the thing that has been talked about in this committee previously, was never brought to market.
Okay, so 2015.
It would depend upon the actual design of the individual item. There were numerous different items being manufactured.
You spent 20 years as a prosecutor, 20 years as a prosecutor. You know the answers to these questions. I'm done asking them. I'm just going to go with numbers. From 2012 until 2023, the ATF estimates that there are 3 to 7 million pistol braces sold on the civilian market, not requiring the $200 stamp from the NFA for a short-barreled rifle. Now, what Congressional Research Service says there are 10 to 40 million of those things purchased in the same period of time. Manufacturer sales estimate are significantly higher than the ATF's estimate to include, and those estimates exclude 2020, 2021, and 2022. Now, the deputy chief of the ATF has stated that prior to June 1, 2023, 255,162 registrations on retroactive purchases were received by the ATF. Does that sound accurate?
I don't know who that person, they're going to have a title like that, but the number sounds like the number of people that during a certain period of time sought registration. The number does sound familiar, but I don't know the quote that you're talking about.
If I got a rancher in southwest North Dakota who's hunting snow geese to a federal wildlife refuge, and a U.S. agent comes out, he purchased that rifle legally in 2015, and he's out shooting geese with a shotgun. U.S. Fish and Wildlife comes to his car and sees a gun in there with a pistol brace. What's the penalty for him now? He bought the gun legally, 2015.
Well, again,
it's 5 to 10 years and a max of a $250,000 fine. You talk about costs, you talk about budget cuts. So let's just assume the low end number of the ATF numbers on 3 to 7 million. 3 million guns that were purchased legally without any extra requirement. The ATF has gotten 255,000 of those registered. So you are roughly saying 2.7 million people are now felons in possession of firearms for something they purchased legally.
I respectfully disagree with a lot of the characterizations in your question. The last administration, Attorney General Barr, issued guidance on this before ATF even got to this. People were on notice for years and years and years that you can't take something and break it into two and then put it together and treat it differently than the person who buys it in one piece.
They bought a gun legally and you guys retroactively made it illegal in a different qualification.
Respectfully, I disagree. That is not what the facts reflect.
I'm the gentleman.
You've heard all those clips. You've heard the story. Do I think that the ATF had valid probable cause and that warrant for his vehicle and his home that were signed, do I think that those were valid and that they should have been signed? Yes. I personally think that Malinowski was breaking the law. I do think that he was dealing in guns, but it kind of stops there. I don't think that Malinowski had any ill intent. I don't think that Malinowski was intentionally selling these to felons. I don't think any of that. I think this is a guy who loved guns, had a hobby, and was just kind of skating that gray line, and he stepped over into the black at some point. That being said, the response is what I have issues with. My questions were, why didn't they serve that search warrant the week prior? My personal feeling is they wanted to arrest him. They knew that the person doesn't have to be home in order to serve that search warrant. They could have done it then. No one so far, and I watched that entire hearing, has answered why not. Why didn't they serve it at that time? But Mr. Common Sense does. And Mr. Common Sense tells me that the true intent was for them to arrest Malinowski when they served the search warrant. But they had to search the house first to find enough probable cause to arrest him. And they were confident they would find it there. And I think they wanted to scare the shit out of him. The second issue, the body-worn cameras. Even local police weren't wearing them, y'all. That proves to me the ATF's intent to hide something. Maybe your agents didn't have body cameras, but the local police do. And if you told them to take them off, and that's the only reason they would have been off, it's because they were trying to hide something. And putting tape on that doorbell camera to serve the search warrant, not an arrest warrant. If you're serving an arrest warrant, I get it. You don't want that person on the inside to be seeing your movements on the outside. But come on, like we've talked about this the whole time. Use your common sense. This guy was not a danger, and you knew it. Putting tape on that doorbell camera, trying to hide. I had a problem with them serving the no-knock warrant, and I've kind of discussed that earlier. But not only did they serve a no-knock warrant on a search warrant and not an arrest warrant, they didn't announce themselves entering his home. You know, ATF, come out with your hands up. They didn't even do that. This is my biggest issue out of this whole case. They knew full well that this guy would not be a danger. He was one of the most well-known people in Little Rock. Very wealthy, had way too much to lose to just not comply. His wife was there, for Christ's sake. That was done to instill fear, plain and simple. Then, after all this, you've already shot this woman's husband and eventually it killed him. They keep his wife in a police car for 4 hours, won't even answer her questions as to how her husband is doing while they search the house. Sorry, pathetic. And they sent 10 unmarked police vehicles anyway, and agents in riot gear to his home. Some estimated between 40 and 50 agents. That's a great use of my money. Great use. All those guys being paid for Brian Malinowski. You're not, picking up Pablo Escobar. I hope some heads roll on this because they need to. A man is dead that didn't have to be dead. And as I said, it could have been any one of us. If that ever happens in my house, you come bust through my door and you don't announce yourself, I'm shooting. And I might be dead after. How many out there that's listening right now can say they're not doing the same thing? That could have happened to any one of us. He didn't know who was busting in his door. He didn't know who those figures were in the hallway. They never announced themselves as ATF. Everybody's shooting, right? Thank you so much for listening to today's episode and listening to every episode that we drop on Exposed. We have some great episodes coming up for you. I may drop another episode in just a couple of days because our boy P. Diddy is in trouble again. I don't know if those parts will ever end with Diddy. Every time I think I put him away for a little while, something else happens, and something else indeed has happened. And until next time, I'm Jim Chapman, your host of Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite. Much love.